Dennis Allen has been very quiet since being let go as the head coach of the Saints. It's been about 9-10 weeks now since DA was let go. And he's kept a pretty low profile, as you would imagine. But he did reemerge on Jay Glazer's podcast earlier this week, and I thought had some interesting things to say. And so we'll hear some of those clips here from Dennis Allen. One was about from Jay Glazer's podcast about the day that Dennis Allen was fired after losing that game to the Panthers.
I was let go on Monday morning. Mickey came into my office, closed the door, said, let's talk. And Mickey was not really in favor of this move. Right. And we talked and we had a really good conversation. So then he kind of said, well, let me, there's a couple of guys I want to talk to the coordinators. You know, I want to talk to Darren Rizzi, who's, right. You know, he's going to have.
Was it you want to talk to him? Or
no, he wanted to talk to them. And I said, look, I want to be able to address the staff. I want to be able to talk to the staff. Okay. And so I had a meeting at 10 o'clock with the coaches and told them, hey, look, this is what happened. This is I got to let go.
It's a hard conversation.
It's an awful conversation.
Yeah, that's a little peek behind the curtains there. And he knows that when that happens, and Will Wade talked about this when he was let go. Will Wade had been making a lot of money, and he felt like he was going to be just fine. But you've brought in staffers who, yes, are well paid relative to average Joe, but are not as well compensated as you, and are now going to be very likely out of a gig very soon, and are going to have to uproot their families and change course. And football coaches, to a degree, sign up for that. And to Dennis Allen's credit, he stayed in New Orleans for a really long time. Like, that just doesn't happen very often. And so he was able to kind of put roots down here for a long time, but a lot of coaches don't. Like, Clint Kubiak's going to show up in February and have to leave again in February. And so there's a human side to that Dennis Allen absolutely wanted to express to those guys, because the second a head coach is let go, the staff is very, very likely to follow. And he felt guilty about that, as he said in the podcast, and wanted to speak with the coaching staff. Now, the question is, did you address the team? And Dennis Allen spoke to that point.
In the world that we live in nowadays, like, things happen and it becomes now public knowledge. Right. And it happens fast. And so as a prideful man, I don't want to be walking out of the parking lot with 1,000 cameras on me, you know, right. and giving that, right, you know, right. part of the story. So most of my stuff with the players ended up being, you know, sending a text, okay. you know, or a call.
And I get that to an extent. I mean, when that happens, it's going to get out really quick, because the reporters for that team have a lot of contacts within the organization, and that's going to come out fast. And the second that comes out, you're going to have every television station and every news reporter with a Twitter camera pointed at you as you walk out, you know, with boxes or in a generic sweatshirt, and get in the car and they're screaming, Dennis, you have anything to say? Dennis, you, and it becomes a whole thing in the parking lot. And I understand Dennis Allen wanting to go, you know, I'd like to address the team, but I'm just going to hop in the car and go, and I'll have the opportunity to speak with these guys, you know, via text or via phone call. I think that conversation changes when a head coach leaves, specifically in the college game, which happens all the time. You've gone in and recruited young men to come play for you, and you feel like you owe an explanation as to what's next and why. I think that's reasonable. When you've been let go, you've been fired, and you've got a lot of guys in that locker room that are going to be back next year in New Orleans. You understand that there was a little bit of a fracture in the locker room based on what we found out in the coming weeks. I don't blame Dennis Allen for having that conversation with Mickey Loomis, going to the coaches that he went to, expressing them what happened, and that, you know, he was obviously sorry about that, and then just getting in the car and heading home. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Would it have been crazy for him to address the team and then to go out into the horde of reporters? No. But I don't have any issue with him kind of leaving the way that he did. they went deeper into kind of Dennis Allen reflecting on his time in New Orleans. You've got time to do that. If this was a fresh wound, if there was some sort of press conference right after, like that's a tougher spot. But this is 2.5 months in the rearview mirror, and so DA was kind of asked, was this a failure for you?
When I think about getting fired, I really think about, well, look, as this is your company, this is your organization, you have the right to do whatever you want to do with that. And I don't look at it as, I failed. I look at it as they just decided they wanted to go in a different direction. And if I'm not what they want, I think there's a lot of spots that I will be what they want.
Right.
Okay. That's one way to look at it. You'd lost 7 games in a row in year 3. You'd never made the playoffs in a bad division. It's certainly not a success. And this is semantics, and it doesn't matter. I think there are a lot of coaches, players that would say, yeah, I failed there. And I think there are a lot of coaches that would say, they wanted to go in a different direction, and I'll have an opportunity. It doesn't matter which way you view it. As I analyze the New Orleans Saints and I look at Dennis Allen's tenure, I would suggest that was a failure. But it doesn't mean he has to acknowledge that is the way that he feels about it. It's just interesting to hear that perspective. I believe if I sat Dennis Allen down for an interview that was solely about his time with the Saints, Jay Glazer's podcast is about mental health. It's actually entitled Mental Wealth. Jay has famously dealt with some mental health issues very publicly and has been kind of a champion for that. And that's the point of this. And I think a lot of the things that he talks about, and certainly in this aspect, was talking about the mental aspect of this and not necessarily, why'd you go for that 4th down or why couldn't you scheme up something better to stop the Panthers? That's not really the point of this. It's more about the process and how you handle things emotionally. And I think if I sat Dennis Allen down, he would say, look, we had a good football team. We showed that through 2 weeks. We got hurt, and we couldn't recover from it. And I could have done some things a little bit better, but ultimately, with the injuries that we had, it was insurmountable. I think he would honestly say that and believe it. And there's an element of truth to that, for sure, I believe. I also think that you're not in a position to recover from injuries in that league when you consistently bail on draft picks, trade up, not stock the shelves with enough talent. You're relying too much on undrafted free agents and free agents that are aging and past their prime, and the roster reconstruction was bad. And I don't know how much of that is Dennis, how much of that is Mickey, how much of that is Lauscha, how much of that is whoever. But the job was not done well. And if he wants to call it a failure or the organization going in a different direction, the direction's got to be away from whatever they were doing, which is his gig, and I do call that a failure. Now, Dennis Allen, to kind of wrap up the sound here, was talking about the job being more than about managing people.
Oh, it's definitely more about managing people because, and again, there's so much more that goes into it than just football. In the world that we live in with social media and everything that every person does in the National Football League is lived out in the public eye. And so you're constantly having to deal with what other people's thoughts and opinions are about you. Right. And so, again, I think that's where you just got to be able to talk to your players and get them to understand, look, again, control the controllables, control the things that you can control, because A, you're never going to make everybody happy. B, you can't control the way somebody is going to feel about you. And that's easier said than done.
That's an interesting soundbite for a lot of reasons. I think in time, we'll find out more about Dennis Allen's time in New Orleans from the players' perspective. You saw the tweets come out, some of the quotes come out in the weeks that followed, especially after those 2 wins when Dennis Allen was let go, that something was broken between Dennis Allen and the team. I can't personally speak to when that started, if it was immediately when Dennis Allen became the head coach, or if it was because they weren't having success and then the bottom kind of fell out and then the bottom really fell out and that's what triggered it.
I've heard a lot of people mention the Falcons game last year.
Yeah, the Falcons game. And to me, I understand the premise. I get it. And the guys who've played football feel very much on the player's side about that. To me, as a person and someone who pays attention to sports, like, I just didn't care about that. Like, I understand that there's a decorum and a sportsmanship element to it. And look, if he called in a play to kneel the ball or to sit on it, and the players just went behind his back and scored an extra touchdown at the end because they needed to get Jamal Williams a touchdown, like, I don't see any value in that. I don't really get it. And I think it's okay if Dennis Allen said, look, that's on me. Like, we didn't mean to do that. And then you just leave it. And apparently it just fractured things between the coach and the player. It just didn't seem like that big a deal. Now, if you come out as the head coach and you say, yeah, we had two guys, they don't know what the hell they're doing, they shouldn't really even be on this team, and you just completely eviscerate the team individually, and you individually call players out, like, okay, that's over the line. Saying that's not how we operate here, and I told him that, I apologized, and then just kind of left it at that. Like, having a massively visceral reaction to that and causing it to become the downfall of the locker room seems extreme to me on the players' part. But the guys I know that have played, Hester, Brandon Taylor, the guys I know that have been in that locker room, side with the players on that. And look, they know much better than me. But that seemed like an overreaction by me on the players' part. And at some point, it just fell apart there. And I do, in a sense, feel for Dennis Allen with all the stuff playing out on social media so publicly with so many players. That's a part that's just tough to manage. And it goes away really quickly when you're winning games. And they just weren't winning any games. So it just magnified and magnified and magnified. And you got Michael Thomas chirping all the time and all that kind of stuff. And it became a snowball that got so big the momentum was unstoppable. And the Saints did what they had to do. The one part of that segment that I didn't harp on that I'll finish with here is that Mickey didn't agree with the decision. That's troubling if you're a Saints fan, that he felt like it was not time to make a move. I mean, think about what you got a chance. You got a chance to evaluate your roster playing with a renewed sense of confidence. You got a chance to evaluate a head coaching candidate. You got a chance to evaluate some stuff that could work when this clearly could not. And for him not to be able to see that is troubling. You've got to hope that he does see it now and that the Saints can move on in a completely different direction. But the podcast is Mental Wealth with Jay Glazer. If you want to check out all of Dennis Allen's sound, it's about 30 minutes worth. I thought that was some of the interesting pieces of it. So, hey, it's on. Thanks for watching Hunt on Saints. Before you leave, help us out a little bit. Hit that like button, leave your comments in the section below, and hit that subscribe button so you get all our content right here from Hunt on Saints. We'll see you next time.